one of the best teams in the state. You're the key to Art's success, on the mat, in the classroom, and as an individual. Art's career record was 71-11. I didn't know you lost 11 matches. Good job. He was the first sophomore from Bloomfield High School to wrestle in the state tournament. In his senior year, Arthur beat the defending state champion in the semifinals, and I always love to tell people this one. His name was Joe Hollywood, and he was from Deptford. And then he went on to beat Joe Manning in the finals to become state champion. Art, it's not so important what you accomplished in wrestling, it's what you accomplished in life through wrestling. I would like to introduce the only state champ in the history of Bloomfield High School, the greatest wrestler in Bloomfield, Art the Barber.
I'd like to thank the Bloomfield Education Foundation and the Bloomfield High School Athletic Hall of Fame for this honor tonight, with extra special thanks to Chris Sparta and Ann Dassing, who in the last couple of months worked with me to make this night such a success. And thank everyone who came out to show their support for me on this memorable evening. I think it's awesome Mr. Johnson showed up as well. Funny thing, someone asked me what his first name was. I said, no clue. I was called him Mr. Johnson. I'm going to start off by sharing with you all tonight how I got into wrestling and how I almost literally quit the first day. On a November day in 7th grade, my brother Chris came up to me and said, you're joining the wrestling team. For you all that know Chris, that was not negotiable. So the first day of practice, I showed up in the back of the South Junior cafeteria. Halfway through, I'm cursing my brother Chris because it was the hardest and worst thing I've ever experienced. After practice, I waited for my sister Gina to pick me up, and as I got in the car, she asked, how was your first day of wrestling? I said, it's a true story. I said, I wish I'd break my arm. She then asked, why? What's wrong? What happened? I said, it was the hardest thing I ever had to do. I never want to go back. You're probably thinking, why didn't you just quit? Well, if you know my brother Chris, that wasn't going to be an option. I made it through the 7th grade, and it was a clinic after the season I attended at Montclair State given by one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, Gene Mills. That became a defining moment in my wrestling career. It was after attending his clinic, I said to myself, I'm going to work at being the best wrestler possible. Ironically, I learned a move from Gene that day I used years later in the quarterfinals of the states to pin one of my opponents. And Gene happened to be sitting in the front row witnessing. He was the head coach of Syracuse at the time. And because of Facebook, Gene and I stay in touch to this day. Now on to high school. Making the varsity team as a 10th grader was a highlight in my wrestling career, as well as being the first sophomore to go to Princeton from DHS. It was while I was on deck in front of thousands of people that one of the most decorated wrestlers in the history of New Jersey wrestling, Tim Jacoto, came up to me and gave me a pep talk before the match. Well, I went out there, and for 6 minutes, I counted the lights on the Jadwin Gym ceiling, meaning I was on my back the whole time. I lost time. It was after that loss I realized I had a lot of work ahead of me. That summer, I wrestled 96 freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling matches. Being a little overconfident the following year, thinking, I went to the States as a 10th grader, I'm going to go as a junior. That wasn't the case. I was pinned first round of the regions. So it was back to work that summer. Senior year, it didn't start out as planned. I missed the first tournament in Dooley because I couldn't make weight. After some talks and advice, reactions from Coach Lackey, my brother John, and an out-of-character talk from Steve O'Neill, I got back on track, and the rest was history. Now, winning the states, brought a couple cool stories.
It's not optional. It's not negotiable.
There are a couple of cool stories I'd like to share with you that came about from winning the states. First, when I was back here last September to be with my dad in his final days, lifelong friend Mike Carter asked me to be his guest on the sideline and to be the honorary point tosser for a big Friday night game. So I get there 20 minutes early and run into Sam Fusaro. He said, to bring me into the locker room. He said, I'm going to bring you into the locker room. I said, whatever you do, please don't embarrass me. Well, of course he didn't listen. He brought me right up to some of the players who wrestled and introduced me to them. To be honest with you, their expressions were priceless. For all you don't know, every year, Coach Fusaro does a field trip by 25 Linden Avenue, where I grew up, to show the wrestling team where the only state champions live. As they walked out to the 50-yard line, they announced my name and accomplishments over the PA system. That night would be a night I will never forget, and to say I was part of a historic season that Bengal team made it that much more special, and I'll always be thankful to Mike for including me. Next, growing up in North Jersey, I was a diehard Yankee fan. Reggie in the 70s, Mattingly in the 80s, Jeter and Mariano for the current Yanks, and Rivera being my favorite of all time. Well, being in Arizona during 9/11 was not an easy time for me, with all my friends and family being back east. It was also a very tough time being a Yankee fan, living in Arizona, especially when Luis Gonzalez stepped up and got the game-winning hit off my favorite Yankee to win the World Series. About a year and a half ago, my son joined one of the top travel teams in the country, coached by Rex Gonzalez, and none other than Luis Gonzalez. So walking out to the car after winning the semis of my son's first tournament, Luis turns to me and says, "Hey Artie, I heard you were a really good wrestler." I said, "I was okay." He said, No. I Googled you last night. You were the 1987 136-pound state champ from Bluefield, New Jersey. Here, the guy's a 19-year Major League veteran, the guy who picked the dagger in most of our hearts is Googling me. He then asked if I had a video of the match. I said, yes. He said, bring it in tomorrow and we'll watch it in the Sprinter. He has his custom Mercedes van with half a dozen TVs in it. After my son's team won the tournament, he said to everyone, for the post-game entertainment, we're going to watch Artie State Championship video. He backed up the Sprinter, about 25 people watched my match along with my botched, brutal TV3 interview, which literally was the first time I've ever watched it myself. And since then, Luis and I have become the closest of friends, and I can tell you all, if anyone was going to beat our beloved Yankees, it could have been a better person than Gonzo. And since the time I prepared this speech, he's having a new house built, and he has a gym, 6,000 square foot gymnasium being built as well. And he's having a fat head of my wrestling picture put on the wall. At this time, I'd like to thank the people who in one way or another played an important role in my wrestling career and life, and without them, my success in the sport wouldn't have been possible. First, my brother Chris, for getting me in the sport, for letting me tag along with him and his friends at all the wrestling functions and activities, and mostly for giving me the toughness ingredient I was missing due to being the baby of the family and somewhat of a mama's boy. Coach Joe White, my first rec coach Billy Del Russo, Mr. Pereno, Ronnie Jones from the Wayne Boys Club, Anthony Matarazzo, Joey Matarazzo, Vinny Russo, my two lifelong friends, Palma and Garcia, who are here tonight, who understood when I didn't go out and party because they knew I was on a mission. Another best friend who was here, Lana Carolla, who in the 32 years I've known her has sent me a birthday card 29 of those years, and for being my personal cheerleader when I was a senior. Her husband and my good friend, Steve O'Neill. Steve was the cool, calm, collected one I could turn to when the rough and tough style advice was too much for me to handle. and for also taking me to watch the NCAA Finals at the Meadowlands in 1984 and getting a chance to watch the Olympic hopefuls work out underneath the Meadowlands. Paul Siciliano gets a big shout out. Paulie was the one who introduced me to freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling. He took me to tournaments, clinics, the Wayne Boys Club, mostly to pay for the gas, but either way, he gets a huge thank you. Then there's Mr. Fusaro. He stepped up and took over the coaching job at South Junior when no one else wanted it. For taking dozens and dozens of videos of all my matches all year round. I know Sammy is one of my biggest fans to this day. I have always appreciated that. My captain when I was a sophomore, Father Mark Vicari. Tony Lavaca, who was my captain when I was a junior. John Stobie, my co-captain as seniors. Fellow wrestlers Nick Messina, Gary Fogarty, Anthony Minervino, Steve Salerno, and Frank McLaughlin. My assistant coach for 3 years, the gentleman who introduced me tonight, Coach Corbo. I really appreciate doing what you did tonight, and also for the last couple of weeks' advice you gave me, and for bringing back so many memories talking with you. Coach Corbo was instrumental my senior year, as he was the only one that could take me down in practice. He was a huge help to me preparing for my season. Even though he wore Glen Ridge stuff to practice and to some of the matches, I still love him. Mr. Lackey, for being my head coach for 3 years, for giving me a very good pep talk before the season started, for giving me that extra motivation towards the end of the season. For all of you who don't know, Mr. Lackey's full name is Bruce H. Lackey. And for the 3 years I was there, he would never tell anyone what the H stood for. Before the States, he said, if you win, I will tell you what the H stands for. So I'm walking off the mat, and the first thing he says to me was his middle name. And as I've told people before, if you want to know what it stood for, you're going to have to be the second state champ of Bloomfield. Or if you find me a shot afterwards, I'm that easy. My family members, Jody Kafari, my sister Gina, who's here tonight, who was always like a second mother figure to me and continues to be to this day. Her husband, Junior, who I know was always a big fan of mine. My sister-in-law, Margaret, who I've always considered a real sister to me. Then there's my brother, John. John, by far, without a question, was my biggest fan, supporter, you name it. John, when he was 22 years old, as the program said, bought me a $700 wrestling mat that got more use than you could imagine. Probably wrestled 300 matches in my career, and he had to be at least 295 of them. If I can cut the award in half today, I would give it to him.
Aww.
Finally, there's Chancey and Johnny. People who know me know who that is, my parents. Without their love, support, and strong family foundation they provided me on a daily basis, especially my mother's understanding about the weight cutting during the holidays, nothing would have been possible. It's my experiences and upbringing I had on Linden Avenue I try to pass on to my kids, Christian and Candy, every day. I know one day they will achieve a goal they made, and I hope I'll be right there by their side to share it with them like my parents did. In closing, I've lived in Scottsdale, Arizona for the past 18 years, where the sun shines literally over 300 days of the year. And I'll tell you right now, here tonight, I wouldn't trade anything in the world to have been born, raised, and grown up in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Yeah. And I'll always be proud to have been a Bloomfield Bengal for the education they provided me and the opportunity to succeed in a wrestling program that had been around for decades. The memories I have from the tournaments I went to, the friendships I made, and still have to this day are priceless. It will be treasured for life. Thank you again for this award, and God bless.